All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And then if I notice people are piling up I might pause to let a few more people in, but I'll go ahead and get us started so we don't wait too long. I want to welcome everyone to this evening's talk with a local native plant designer, brought to you by Wild Ones Greater Richmond, Virginia chapter. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our panelists have given us permission to record and post this evening's discussion to the chapter's YouTube channel. So if all goes well with the technology, we should be able to post it later on this week, and we'll send a notice out to everybody when it's ready and available to be viewed. We'll also post the link to our chapter website, which I will add to the chat so everybody can access that later. Tonight's panelists are all active in Richmond's native plant community. We're pleased to welcome Kaity Bevenour of Parallel Nursery, Kat Cox of RVA Homegrown Natives and Sassafras Tree and Garden, Stacey Moulds, who is owner of Domestica Landscapes and co-founder of local Ecotype Richmond Natives, and Lydia Nichols of Greenwitch Gardens and Native Plants. Additional information on each panelist's background will be posted into the chat for your convenience. And if you don't know how to save the chat, you can click on the 3 buttons and save it to your own computer, and we will save the chat as well if you need to access it later. During the first half hour, the panelists will each take a few minutes to provide comments from the perspective of a designer advising clients. The second half will begin with a few questions that were submitted in advance by chapter members, just to get us going, and then we'll open the floor to additional questions. Given the number of people who may be joining us tonight, I would like to ask you to submit questions in the chat. You can find the chat by scrolling down to the bottom of the screen. It should look like a little word balloon. And if you can't see it immediately, there should be a little 3 dots with more next to it, and click on that to expand the menu items at the bottom, and you should be able to find the chat. If you cannot find the chat, you can try raising your hand, but it'll be easier for us to track if you use the chat. If you would like to direct a question to a specific panelist, please include their name in your question. And Julie, who is with us tonight, will monitor the chat and facilitate asking the questions so that we can get through as many as possible. Our first panelist, Kaity Bevenour, is a certified Chesapeake Bay landscaping professional who enjoys designing with native species for their versatility, underappreciated beauty, and environmental benefits. Please take it away, Kaity.
Hey, can everybody hear me? Hopefully. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, like Sharon said, I'm a native plant propagator and designer, and my focus is on using conservation principles in landscape design, both for the habitat benefits and the environmental benefits, but also for the less visible human-centric benefits. So like your water filtration, pollution capture, and sediment capture before it runs off into the bay and our rivers. So my focus is on getting the most benefit out of your landscape for both the planet and for you. So I just wanted to talk really quickly about what I usually do in my steps as I'm choosing, plants for my clients' landscapes, what I think about. And so, choosing those local native plants, looking at, where in Virginia they are based on coastal or more of a Piedmont area, and looking to those counties for that local regional list and being as specific as you can. The more local you are, the more benefits you're going to get, especially for those like flying freebies, as I call them, the birds and the butterflies, those things that bring a lot of movement and joy and the more psychological benefits to a landscape rather than just the physical beauty of a space. So I do tend to focus on people a little bit more than a lot of conservation principles. So when you're looking to reevaluate your space, it also gives you an opportunity to reevaluate our more traditional garden design choices. So everybody's into reducing the lawn right now. I don't have to tell this group of people, the overall benefits for that. But when you're looking at reducing your lawn, what can you add to your space? Can you add more low maintenance beds with more ground cover so that you're reducing erosion runoff and that you're allowing water to sit in a space and percolate in and have all those pollutants be captured? Can you add in spaces where you're not adding inorganic materials like mulch or gravel? The least amount of inputs you can put in your space, the greater benefits you're going to find over time. And just ways to reduce your overall maintenance time in a space. You should be able to enjoy your space, use it more often, but not have as much work in that space. So that's kind of my goals when I'm thinking about choosing where and when to plant the plants. As far as plant selection go, I always like to think about that as a perennial grower. I'm looking to natural communities to inspire my plant list, to inspire my design choices and the way that things look. But mimicking those natural processes allows us to set our gardens up for a lot more success. So covering the ground really quickly with fast growing species that reseed to allow those more slow growing perennials and shrubs to have time to establish themselves. I really like using, short-lived species like partridge pea for that. And as those plants like Baptisia or your shrubs establish, they're going to fade out of your landscape. So mimicking natural processes can be really helpful for you when you're picking out your plant list and looking to those natural communities like prairie compositions, rain gardens, forests. That's where I like to get a lot of my plant list inspiration from. So that I don't want to talk too long because I know we have other panelists, but and I could talk all day long. So feel free to add more questions to the chat, but I'd love to pass it off now to our next panelist.
Thank you very much, Katie. Our next panelist is Kat Cox, who is, I was privileged to listen to Kat speak at a presentation she gave to the Virginia Native Plant Society chapter. And it was really fascinating because she was talking about movement in the garden. And I liked listening to her presentation because it's one of the things I like in my own garden, watching the grasses move, and it gives you a different kind of appreciation for plants separate from bloom color or other aspects. And I think Kat is gifted at incorporating various aspects of philosophy and artistry into her work as an ecological garden designer. So Kat, if you can share some comments with us, please go ahead.
Is she here? I don't see her on the list anymore.
Kat was with us. Tell you what, we will skip ahead and come back to Kat when she can rejoin us. Perhaps we can send another invite to get her back. She may be having the same kind of problems that I sometimes have with Zoom. While we're waiting for Kat, we will move on ahead to Stacey. Stacey Moulds recently served as the Virginia Department of Transportation's Pollinator Habitat Program Coordinator, in which capacity she created numerous naturalized areas planted with native nectar and pollen plant species at safety rest areas and other VDOT-owned properties. Stacey provides landscape design services through Domestica LLC and also is co-founder with Bill Shanabrook of Local Ecotype Richmond Natives, a nonprofit that provides both seed-grown local ecotype plants and education on the value of local wild plant populations to inspire conservation efforts. Stacey, would you go ahead?
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Sharon. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, I'm just excited to be here today. I am really, I think my landscaping design has evolved over the years. I really mostly self-taught, and over the years, though, with my working for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay and then for VDOT later, I've really switched my focus to having as many native plants in a landscape as possible. And then also including, depending on the client, including edible plants as well, as much as possible if that's something they're interested in. So I think some of the points I usually, if I'm meeting with a client, especially if they want to include native plants, there needs to be some flexibility on the client's part, because a lot of native plants, especially ones that are really local to the Richmond area, which is what I recommend, sometimes they're difficult to source from regular nurseries, which is part of the reason that I and Bill Shannonbrook work to create Learn, so that, because we grow plants that are native within 30 miles radius of Richmond. And a lot of those plants are not ones you could typically find at a nursery, but even at regular retail nurseries, they have a fairly limited list of native plants that are available, even though it's getting a lot better. But a lot of the ones that they have are not necessarily straight species. So there just needs to be some flexibility with, and also just because sometimes a lot of things are going to be smaller that you get when you get them from a native plant nursery than you would typically see at a regular retail nursery. And then kind of following up on, I haven't been able to see Kat Cox's presentation yet. I'm hoping to this week, actually, when I go on vacation. But I also really wanted to, I love native grasses. And one of the things I try to encourage people to do is embrace shades of brown in the winter, because we're a temperate climate and we're not meant to, it's not meant to be green in the wintertime. I kind of think of it, especially with all my interest in edible gardening, you think about it, if you think about it like eating seasonally, you know, if a strawberry in the middle of winter is not going to taste very good. So embrace those beautiful shades of brown in your grasses and all of those interesting seed heads. And, you know, things are going to get a little ugly come February, March, but, you know, spring will be here again. That's the great part about where we live, our seasonality. And so really just trying to encourage people not to feel like they need to have evergreen plants all the time, because I think a lot of you probably know most evergreen plants that you see here in the landscapes are not, we don't have a lot of evergreen plants, especially in our ground cover layer. And so most of the ones you see in people's gardens, especially ground covers and shrubs, they're often not native. And in fact, a lot of them are invasive and are really have been very detrimental to our wild natural areas. So yeah, embrace the brown. Also, you know, usually when I meet with a client, they haven't necessarily thought about how, so they sometimes just want you to just figure it all out. And so I usually go with them, go through a list of, you know, what are their goals for their garden? How do they want to use their garden? And because in addition to, you know, for looking beautiful for them, do they want to attract wildlife? And then what type of wildlife? Are they really into birds? Are they really looking for pollinators? And so, like Katie said, your yard can be beneficial for wildlife, but it should also be beneficial for you, because it's, you know, it's your yard also that you're sharing, that we're sharing really with wildlife. But so usually I'll meet with them and talk with them and ask them a lot of questions about, you know, what their goals are, how do they want to use their yard, and then just basic things like pathways. When they arrive home on their car or their bicycle, how do they get to their house? And then when they're taking out their garbage and the recycling, how do they, you know, what their pathways are. Do they have kids? Do they want to have an area for the kids to run around? So maybe a small lawn. Do they have dogs or cats? And if so, are they ones that typically eat a lot of vegetation? Do they like to dig? You know, so making sure that you include something for everybody in your garden. Let's see, I could go on and on too. And then
Maybe one more point and then we'll move back to Kat.
okay, one thing also, especially if you're starting with a new yard and you have a big space. And I've learned this lesson myself, but be cautious when you're accepting free plants from people. Because a lot of times that they're free because they've gotten too big in their yard, and some, so just know what you're getting, because a lot of the times your free plants might be ones that are, if you really want native plants, they might not be native, and in fact they could be invasive, and they could take over your yard as well, and then creep into a natural area. So I think that's it for now.
Thank you very much, Stacey. And now, Kat, if you are able to, we would love to circle back and have you give us some thoughts.
Hi, can y'all hear me? Yay, I know you can't see me. I can't figure the video out. I'm on somebody else's computer, but yeah, so I'm so glad to be here. Sorry I'm late. And I did not get to hear what Kaity said, unfortunately, but just to kind of, one thing I do want to mention, you know, some key points that I wanted to bring up, just the importance of planting native, and in particular, we all eat plants. And that new development displaces a lot of our native species, especially. So it's just like, especially when we get into our new development, I just wanted to say how important it is that we do plant native plants back. I mean, a lot of these places come with like a package deal. Like you get a house built by XYZ company, and you can get this plant with this plant with this plant. And a lot of that is HOA driven. And it's also, coming from a different type of gardening than we are seeing now, luckily. But unluckily, we don't have like a native plant package that you can put in the yard. Some people are willing to deal with the HOAs, and luckily there are certain plants that are more fitting for an HOA environment that are still native. But we all, that is one of our main displacements of our native species, and we all eat plants. So, and even if you don't eat plants, you're eating something that did. So, but I also wanted to talk about, short-term goals versus long-term goals, and long-term being like 5+ years. Realistically, like, yes, we want to talk about what type of relationship are we trying to cultivate with nature or our outdoor space. Some people want different things, but the main thing is having that coherence, which starts with planting native, looking at our ecoregion, seeing what's already growing that is native around the area, will give us a good palette to start with. And I think it's really important, though, to think about your short-term goals versus long-term goals, and what you're really willing to dedicate towards that third space that you're trying to create, and what you want that third space to be. We all need a third space. And, that kind of drives me into a little bit of environmental psychology, and that we do need, we have a psychological need for nature. So I wanted to point on that, because what does nature need from us? How can we reciprocate that relationship? And, we have a psychological need for nature in small, aesthetically pleasing, experiences, and in vast stretches. So design is really important there, especially when you're working with a small space, because you want the small in front of the tall. You want something to make sense when you're looking at it. It helps you to understand the space a little bit better, and having an immediate understanding of a space helps you to relax, I just have a little bit of a different viewpoint in that goal, but our natural gardens are constantly evolving. So it's not a static thing. So it's like really wanting to know what you want out of nature, in your relationship with it. And I think that when we start with one native plant and we develop a relationship with that native plant, it makes it not so overwhelming. You start with a whole bunch of, I mean, we want the biodiversity, but say you start with 5 different species this year, but you work with one really in particular. And, you know, in a way that allows you to understand it better, whatever that means to you. Some people like to cook with it, some people like to read about it, you know, but it helps us to not be so overwhelmed. You know, and even that will help us also kind of lead us into what a host relationship is and why native plants are important with our host insects, and why it's important to have certain species available for insects that can only utilize that one, or, you know, type of genus or plant in particular.
Kat, maybe make one more point and then we will move on to our final speaker and then take questions. Is that right?
Yeah, I think,
Thank you.
you know, something to think about is just like what we've been conditioned to think about native plants. You know, like violas were always bad in the lawn, but really they're a host for the fritillary butterfly. You know, they're like an excellent host plant, and they're beautiful and they're edible. And, you know, also what we're currently being conditioned to think about native plants, you know, we still have to have an open mind with what, you know, this ever-changing world. So, I guess that would be my final point, is just to kind of think about those things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
And our final panelist will be Lydia Nichols of Greenwitch Gardens and Native Plants. Lydia is a resident of North Chesterfield and an Army veteran who has turned into an avid gardener. I believe you won a prize at the Chesterfield County Fair some years back for one of your vegetables or some squash of some sort. And also a native plant enthusiast. And Lydia's passion for plants has led her to open her own nursery and begin working with clients to help them develop native plantings on their own properties. So welcome, Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you hosting this and you know, giving us this forum to meet with people and talk about what we do. Like Stacey, excuse me, I got something in my eyeball. Like Stacey, I'm self-taught. I kind of fell into native plants thanks to my daughter. She attended a lot of different school programs throughout her school days and would come home and tell me, oh, we learned about milkweed this week. And I'd say, milkweed, you know, she's, oh, it's the host plant for the monarchs. And so that kind of led to me growing my own natives, wanting to shrink my own lawn. It used to take us about 2 hours to mow our property here, and now we're down to about 30 minutes, and most of that is with an electric weed eater. So shrink that lawn, you could do it. So I started growing for myself, and then friends would say, oh, will you sell me some of your plants? And I said, oh, yeah, sure, I can sell you some of my plants. And that just kind of led to me opening up Greenwitch Gardens, which my main goal was to grow and make native plants more accessible, because there is a huge demand. And every year I feel like it's getting more and more. And especially for our home-based smaller growers, it can be hard to kind of meet that demand. But anyway, to the landscaping part, I had friends kind of refer me to a couple clients. I had friends who wanted me to do work for them after they saw what I've done with my property. And it just kind of led into this beautiful thing where I get to go out and help people nativize their own yards. You know, I work with a lot of great clients. Most of them are very open-minded. A lot of them really want to, you know, they want pollinators, they want the butterflies, they want the birds, but they're also still kind of looking for something a little bit more like defined, kind of maybe traditionalist. So trying to find and bridge that gap between like using natives, but also making them look presentable and pretty in the, you know, old type of mind frame that we're trying to get away from, is kind of what I love to do. I love to show people that you can still landscape with natives and they can still look very nice, and, you know, with a little bit of trimming up here and there and a little bit of maintenance, you know, less maintenance than most ornamentals, of course, but you can still have a really nice looking pollinator habitat. And another thing I like to do is promote rain gardens as well. I know Katie touched on, you know, water retention and being able to help filter the water to keep it from going into our rivers and our bays. And I feel like for a lot of my clients, it's like a new thing that they haven't really heard about. Um, so it's been kind of neat to get them to kind of think outside the box, and also be able to offer them plants that they wouldn't normally be able to have in their regular landscape. Like things like button bush and things that want more, that have higher water usage. So they can have them and enjoy their beauty, and also enjoy the ecological value that those plants are providing without necessarily having like a giant pond in their yard, which isn't always doable for a lot of places. Oh, let me see. What else? Gosh, now I'm drawing a blank. Um, yeah, I'm not really I know we're at 7:30 now, so I guess that's pretty much
A
yeah.
good introduction. Thank you very much, Lydia.
You're welcome.
So we
You're welcome.
will start our questions with a few questions that were submitted earlier by chapter members. So first one, and that'll give people who are in the audience, if you'd like to add a question to the chat, we already have one. If you have difficulty with the chat, you can you can hit the raise button, but it'll be easier for us to keep things organized if you use the chat. So first question, what are your favorite ways to create borders that show cues to care? And are there different conditions that cause you to choose one method versus another method? So we'll go first back to Lydia and then to Katie for answers.
Okay, so the cues to care part. Can anyone elaborate on, what that means? I might be missing something.
Cues to care are things like if you have a fence or something in your garden that shows your neighbors that this is a deliberate planting, it's not just a mass of weeds, things like that.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay, yeah. So my favorite ways to use borders like that, I love using carex. I feel like grasses are very underused and underappreciated. But they just add so much life and texture, especially with carexes. We have a lot of them that are evergreen, fun little seed heads. I mean, you can't really go wrong with them. And a lot of them have that neat little mounding shape that makes like a great border. It can be a great replacement for the Liriope, the dreaded Liriope. And as far as like choosing one or the other, depending on like the sun situation, of course, for a shadier area, I would probably go with like Carex pennsylvanica. For one that has a little bit more sun, I might try Carex cherokeensis. And of course, there are great perennials that you could use too. One I really like is wintergreen Gaultheria. Can be a little tricky sometimes. They can be a little picky, but I just love the berries. And a lot of installations I've done where the families have had children, I put them in so that way the kids can actually eat them, supervised, of course. But I just think it's a neat little way to get kids interested in native plants as well. Plus, they're evergreen, very pretty, showy little plants. So it's another great one.
Thank you. Katie, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, for sure. I love this question because, like Lydia was saying, a lot of people think you can't have some of those more formal indicators, formal design markers like, evergreen borders or, flowering edges that are very tiered. And a lot of the plants that I use for borders keep their basal foliage all year long. That way you know that there's presence, even if they are a larger flowering plant. So you have that dynamic shifting where the landscape isn't still. So one plant that does that really well that's in bloom right now actually is the foxglove beard tongue, Penstemon digitalis. You've got this really big green leaf that stays evergreen. There are cultivars like the Husker's Red that are really popular. I don't recommend using that variety because typically when plants are bred to have more of like a reddish or a purple leaf, they actually lose, the insects lose their ability to recognize them because they're not seeing something that's giving them the same indicators as those typically green leaves. And they also tend to contain more chemical compounds that taste bitter to the insects, which is why a lot of times they're more pest-free ones. So you will see Husker's Red used on a lot more like HOA installations. Some people don't know it's a native plant because it's used so commonly. But the true variety is going to be a deep, deep green, and the flowers are nice and white. You can pair that with shorter plants like your moss phloxes, your caryxes. For your more part shade spaces, I like to use a mix of like caryxes and flowering plants like your green and golds. Just creating those lines. I don't recommend using a lot of inorganic materials like plastic edging, where you're creating those really sharp borders. You want water and plants to be able to permeate them, but one way you can define those cues to carry is to edge them with a weed whacker, or to go around with your shovel and create a really sharp line where your turf is next to a garden bed. So that can be a good indicator that, hey, we're still maintaining the front edge of this garden bed to be, very clearly clean, but inside of that garden bed, it's, wild and growing up, even with those border plants that are a little more evergreen. So yeah, those clean cut edges, having evergreen border plants. I also like to use signs. So I have this one over here. So, oh God, you can't see it. It says pollinator habitat by the Xerces Society, but you can make your own. And especially when you have like young children at the property, or if you're, a grandparent, or if you are a teacher, getting people to make handmade items can really show your neighbors like, no, this space is really cared for. This isn't some pop-up garden that just showed up and isn't going to be cared for in a few years. This is a space that's going to be growing with these people over time to be, something so much more than the lawn that they would have normally walked by. I think that's something that you can really show people too, is that they're gaining something by you doing this. You're not just, making something messy and I gotta walk by there and I'm worried about ticks and da 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 da. You're giving them something to enjoy that adds to their property value and to yours. So hit people where they care, basically. That is cues to care, where you're like, man, I don't really mind so much if the edges are messy, but my neighbor really cares. So just having the courtesy of thinking a little bit from their perspective can also be a really big shift in how they interact with your space.
Cool.
So
Thank you,
those
Kaity.
are my best rambles about that.
Stacey or Kat, would you like to add any comments to this before we go to the next question?
Yeah, another way, like Kaity said, I do a lot of the times with installs, we'll cut in the bed. You can cut it in with a shovel and you can tell it's very clearly a border. Um, something else you could do in terms of cues to care and just environmentally is, we have Sassafras Tree and Garden, which is primarily where I design out of currently. But I do some stuff out of RVA Homegrown Natives just in the last year. And we have a wood salvage with Sassafras Tree and Garden. So we do reuse a lot of the stuff what we do reuse a lot of the wood that we remove, in terms of pruning, or even if it was a candidate for removal, my husband and I process that wood. And you can create a lot of natural borders with certain types of woods. Like Leyland cypress was the latest project we did. And you can use it vertically too. You don't have to just put like a timber down. Like you can cut it into smaller cookies is what we call them, and like stack them different heights. You can interplant that with ferns and other shade loving plants that, I mean, if it's in the shade or but the last one we did was, but I just wanted to add that, looking up maybe a local wood salvage would be a good place to also get materials for borders. And in terms of just wanting to create like a border, we do have taller species sometimes that work in part sun, part shade, like the wax myrtle, for instance. That's my border out front of my house. It's my whole screening. So sometimes you can get away with that species, which is good. But
Great.
yeah.
Thank you. Stacey,
Mhm.
anything to add before we go to the next question?
Everybody's had good points. I think signage can be helpful. I know when I was with VDOT, when we had some big, large areas where we were not only mowing them once a year at most, mowing along the edge, to show that it's intentional was really helpful. And then sometimes if you have a large area, like for more like wildlife areas where people can go, making sure to include some paths. So you could take an area and then just mow a path through it, and then, alternate the different areas where you mow so that you're minimizing insect damage. But just, I think doing anything you can, like homemade signage would be great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How do you treat the compacted space under established trees to be able to plant there? We'll go back to Stacey first and then to Kat for quick answers, and then I'll go straight to the next question.
Yeah, I guess I think it depends on the tree. Especially if it's a very old special tree, I would recommend not planting underneath it at all, or really proceeding with caution, because most, I know everybody has the diagram where they think the below ground roots are just going to mirror the shape of the tree above, but it's really not like that. The roots of the tree are usually pretty shallow, and sometimes they can extend very far, even further than where the edge of the above ground growth goes. So I would say really proceed with caution. That said, when you go into woodland areas, you see a lot of, if it's not invasive plants like evergreens like ivy and honeysuckle. They're in this part of the world, we do have a lot of understory ground cover plants that naturally coexist with trees. So I would say if you really want to plant something under your tree, go with things that can take dry shade, because those trees are going to be, they're always going to be the ones that are going to be taking most of that moisture. So whatever you plant is going to always be competing with that tree for moisture, those roots. And then you want to be careful. You don't want to damage the tree. So, I would plant small. So plugs are great. Shallow, I wouldn't go with anything larger than like a 4-inch pot. And then, use a hand trowel and go really carefully, and don't disturb any roots that are larger than, your thumb, or like I've seen somewhere the width of a Sharpie. And I know it can be tempting, but you don't want to cover under. I mean, it might look really nice to put, a few inches of soil underneath that tree so you can plant. But when you do that, you're really impacting the tree's availability to breathe. And you can prevent that tree from getting enough oxygen. So proceed with caution, and then there are a lot of good dry shade loving native plants, like, let's see, I made a list. Coral bells, heuchera, blue stem goldenrod. Actually, when I see them in the James River Park and like at Lares Park, they're oftentimes right up against the tree root. They like to kind of nestle in there. I think even they get a little bit of protection from being up in a tree root. White wood aster, blue wood asters, those are both really good shade loving fall blooming plants that like dry. There's a native sedum tornatum, that does well in dry shade. Our phlox, the creeping phlox, or not creeping phlox. What am I? Not the stone. Yes. Green and gold, lyre leaf sage, our wild violets, fleabane daisy. Then, like Lydia talked about, there's a lot of caryxes. So sometimes I look and see if you've got an area that's woody, that's wooded, maybe look and see what's there naturally. There'll probably be a lot of little, really adorably cute native grasses that live in that condition. So,
All right. In interest of time, I'm gonna skip over our question about dogwoods and go straight to the questions in the chat. If Julie can shepherd us through those to throw them out, that would be great. And then if we have time, we'll come back to the dogwood question at the end.
Sure. So our first question is from Melissa. How do we get our local governments to embrace native plantings on government properties, at parks, government centers? Any idea on the issue of who is going to maintain it complaint?
And if you would like to address this, go ahead and unmute.
I mean, there's already legislation that just got passed, I believe, about that state-owned lands are supposed to use natives. I think they gave them a certain percentage, 50%, but lead by example. That was with VDOT, that was, we were always supposed to try to use natives first. That being said, I don't think it necessarily always happens, but I think if there's a place that's nearby you and it's a state-owned land, you know, reach out to that entity and suggest that they use natives. I think it is getting more typical. So I know probably makes sense, but we're sharing where we go to the RVA natives meetings, that we go to the Department of Wildlife Resources, and that's probably one of the better state agencies, but they have a nice native planting right in front of their office. And I think that's a great example to just show that it can be a little bit wild, but it can also be maintained.
I think the legislation was fairly recent, but there are some responses to it. Like in Richmond, the James River Association has the Greening Richmond Libraries Initiative, and they're beginning to install more native plantings around the library branches in the city. So I think over time we'll start seeing more public examples. But the question of who maintains them is kind of complicated at times. Often it's left to volunteer groups, from what I understand.
I will say RVA Green 2050 is doing in the city on Cutshaw Avenue. They are right now advocating to depave a section of that road to turn it into a native plant garden. So there is initiatives happening. It seems we did an event with a lot of the sustainability and parks people, and it seems like there's a lot of push from many different directions. So it's just about getting in there and supporting those volunteer days, like really staying tuned into your local pop-up events and things like that can make a really big difference. Just showing those people that people really do care. It gives the people doing all the boring paperwork a lot of energy.
I just did for one of those library projects, the James River Association learned to do a pollinator garden. And it was interesting because it was a shade garden, and they only wanted local ecotype plants. So it was small, but it was exciting.
Okay, let's move on to the next question so we can try to hit most of the ones that were brought by people tonight.
Oh, and Diane asked, what is meant by third space? From what I understand, it's something that's not your home or your work. Is that right? I don't know where that came up, but
Yeah, I mean, your third space, we all look. A third space is a place to go to decompress. Some people go to the gym, you know, like I go to the barn, I have a horse. I also go to my garden, you know. But if you don't have it, you know, some people it's just really important to create that for themselves. So that's what I meant by third space, because going to the garden can be your third space if it's, you know, de-stresses you enough. And
Right.
even then you're pulling stuff out that you don't want there and planting new stuff, and that's all physical too. So, but yeah, just having that extra space that's not home, that's not work, that you can go and just de-stress.
And then we have a question from Janet. I am on the maintenance committee for the Brander Mill Community Association. Our committee is working to promote native landscapes first at 3 community entrances, with next steps to move to have all the neighborhood, the entrances go native Brander Mill. So many neighbors here are still converting properties to grass when they were once trees. Oh, okay. We have a lot of education to do. What are tips that you can give to help us get off to a good start? That is awesome, Janet.
That's great. I was gonna say, I don't know if, because I know there's clubhouses and things there, like, it might be a big ask, but maybe try to put on some, like a native pollinator festival or, some sort of event just to raise awareness, about native plants. You have organizations like, of course, Wild Ones. We have our Virginia Native Plant Society. There's other organizations out there that would probably love to get involved, set up tents, displays, activities for the kids to do that might kind of garner interest in getting the Brander Mill residents on board.
And I have some friends that live in Brander Mill, and I'm always really impressed with. I know when Brander Mill first got started, I think I had just moved to Richmond. Was still sort of being developed, but they did a really good job of leaving a lot of the trees. And my neighbor, one of my best friends, lives in Brander Mill, and she has winterberry, and I mean, she has so many native plants. And I think also she kind of knew what she had, so she didn't try to put a lawn in. She worked with what she had. So that may not be completely typical, but I don't know. I think you guys have a lot of special habitat there already.
Just speaking for Wild Ones, if you would like us to come and talk with you or speak at a meeting with members of your committee, we would be happy to put something together and try to point you toward resources, both ours and beyond us in the area. So stay in touch.
I would say one book I'd recommend is called Prairie Up. It comes from the perspective of working from, a homeowner's perspective. You're talking to HOAs. There's a lot of chapters about how to speak to people about getting them excited about what you're doing. So Benjamin Vogue is a Midwestern designer who is really big in advocating the philosophical and the practical approach to the native plant movement. So I recommend looking into his works. And there can be some plant lists from other organizations like the Xerces Society that are targeted right to the Mid-Atlantic region. If you look up the Mid-Atlantic ecoregion, that can sometimes get you a little bit more specific to Virginia and Central Virginia lists, rather than a lot more general stuff you'll find out there now that won't help you with Virginia things. So a lot of resources, but confusing.
That's awesome. I had not heard of that book, so I'm definitely going to get it as well. Okay. Let's see. Kelly. I have a somewhat open, shady spot in my yard that I started trying to make a mini grassland with a path between ending in a flower bed. Do you have any suggestions for this? I just started cutting the path and grass is growing with other things, including invasives. If I just let it go, will the grass choke things out, or should I try and put cardboard down and start from scratch?
If I was going to advise a client about that, I would say it depends on how much maintenance you want to do on like a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. If you don't mind going out every morning and pulling small grasses and, managing a lot more regularly than you will in the future, you can avoid doing things like cardboard, or sometimes I'll put down pine straw will help smother things, and the acidity released from the pine straw can help with that. But if you're not going to be able to do that regular, like many times a week management on a small scale for just a small period of time each day, I would recommend laying down some of that cardboard to help you out, because it can be very overwhelming. And I would recommend choosing spreading plants at first. Even if you want some of those slow growing establishing shrubs, pick things that are going to grow quickly that you can remove some of, the white wood aster, blue mist flower, wood sedge, Pennsylvania sedge. Those spreading plants, you can take some of them away later on if you need to. You can edit and have more fun with that. If you choose species that are a little bit less sociable, they're more aggressive. That will cover the ground and fight invasive species. Sea oats is a wonderful plant for that, but it can be a problem in really manicured garden spaces. But I use it to fight stiltgrass and honeysuckle and English ivy in my yard with the blue mist flower. And, you know, Wood said many things you can combine together to just fill that space as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Deer have been mowing down my native shrubs. Is there actually an effective deer deterrent besides fencing? I want to say no, but I'm not an expert here.
Yeah,
If
deer.
you change their pathway somehow, that's the fencing helps because you're deterring them from walking regular paths that they're following because they're kind of lazy. They're just going to go where the path of least resistance is. They tend to also not like ferns, grasses, and things that have hairy leaves or have a scent to them. So surrounding those plants with things that if they were to put their face in that where that shrub is growing to eat it, that would bother them, that can be an effective deterrent.
Awesome. What are the speakers' availabilities for consulting on site? So we could have you guys put it in the chat as well. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
each of our panelists should address
Yes,
this one if
yes.
they can. Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
Lydia, go ahead.
So I am pretty much booked up until the fall. But during the summer, it's not a great time to plant. Might have some availability to do some design work. But as far as plant sourcing and installation, I would definitely want to wait until the weather gets a little cooler.
I'm the same way. I would say, I mean, things will slow down in July, but I wouldn't, by then I would wait to plant until fall, which, you know, sounds like it's forever, but it's really not. It gives, I always am a big proponent of planning ahead. And if it's some area like the previous speaker, you know, that's when you, if you don't have a plan already in place and you've already removed things, go ahead and put that mulch down and that cardboard and mulch and just put a hold on it.
Okay.
As a planning is a great idea. You can always, you know, you can always learn more starting early, starting in the summer, starting in the winter, starting with just how you want to use your space can be really helpful. If you come to us with some information, that can speed up the process a little bit, but I would say patience will save you money and it will save you heartache and a little bit of flexibility about, you know, if you know you want a certain species, let us know. If you are flexible about us just serving a purpose, giving your designer a little bit of carte blanche to make some choices when they're choosing inventory, because right now the demand is so high that even if you're booking projects with hundreds of plants many months out, you may not be able to get the plants you want, even commonly, you know, asked for species, just because big government jobs and other larger installations are starting to happen with these plants. So planning ahead can save you money and save you time.
Thank you. And we've put the websites for each of the panel members in the chat. So if you want to reach out with further questions to contact them, you can always go to the website and use the contact link and ask a question, or contact them if you'd like to schedule some consulting later in the year.
Kat, are you busy as well? Did you answer as well and I missed it? Are you still there?
Pardon?
Is Kat still there? Did she answer that question?
I think Kat may be off the.
Okay,
on the
sorry.
Zoom.
So Diane says, I'm looking for a consultation for the purpose of planning ahead, but then waiting until fall to plant. Are folks mostly busy for the planning part until fall? Sounds like yes. It's pretty booked. Sorry, Diane. Well, you're welcome to, we have a lot of resources on our website if you're a Wild Ones member. And Lydia's putting in the chat where to reach her. Awesome. Any last questions? It's 7:59, so we have 60 seconds left.
Shall I go to the dogwood question? The dogwood question was, someone would like to plant a couple of dogwoods, but she was reading about the anthracnose, I hope I pronounced that right, fungus that's been harming dogwoods in Virginia. And they wanted to know, is it isolated in some areas, and how concerned should they be about planting a dogwood that they can get from a friend's property? Who might like to address this question?
I would be concerned because it is pretty much spread everywhere. Some dogwoods seem to be able to fend it off, but I would be worried about bringing it from somewhere and then maybe you're bringing that into your neighborhood, and then you could spread it all over the neighborhood. When you said this as a question a while ago, I looked, there is pagoda dogwood is a native dogwood that's kind of similar. It's not strictly local to Richmond, but in the like Caroline and Prince George County. So there's that might be a good substitute. But otherwise, maybe go with something that is another small understory shrub that has white flowers, like serviceberry. I know just from talking with a couple nurseries, they're having a lot of difficulties even with their nurseries, that their dogwoods that they're selling to clients, they're getting a lot of feedback that they're not surviving. And I know there are disease resistant cultivars available, but I don't, if you wanted a street species, it's going to be a little bit different. So I would tend to say, look at something else.
So it sounds like proceed with extreme caution, at least for the time being.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We've reached 8:01. So I want to thank everybody for submitting questions, and thank you especially to our panelists who spent time preparing for tonight and submitted ideas and questions of their own, and for spending their time with us tonight. We will save the recording and post it and save the chat. And we'll send you a link to access the recording. Everybody who registered will get the link probably sometime in about, excuse me, 3 days to a week. I apologize. So thank you very much, and everybody have a good evening, and we look forward to being in touch again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.